A little change of scenery here. I'm up at school, missing you guys like crazy. It's way too quiet without you all here. Fuzzy Mud continuing on chapter 18, Wednesday, November 3, 1 p.m. It had been more than a month since Marshall had played basketball with his friends. A month since he had had any friends, and all it had taken was a day, just one day, without Chad. Marshall never did anything, Laura Muskrans had said. Chad's just mean. Those may have been the sweetest words he had ever heard in his whole life. Still, as he sat at his desk in Mr. Davison's class, 3 seats away from Chad's empty desk, he couldn't get the image of Tamaya's grotesque hand out of his mind. Torn strips of bloody gauze had dangled from her blistered flesh. He saw her eyes, too. They pleaded with him to do the right thing. Man, just when things are finally going good for me, he thought. Why do girls always have to go and ruin everything? He knew the right thing to do. He had known it when Mrs. Thaxton had come into his classroom and told everyone that Chad was missing. The only reason he hadn't told her the truth right then and there was because he didn't want to get Tamaya in trouble. That was what he told himself. He had kept quiet for Tamaya's sake. But deep down, he knew that was not the truth. He had remained silent because he was scared and ashamed. Not that it mattered anymore. He knew it was just a matter of time before Tamaya told someone, either her teacher, Ms. Filbert, or else Mrs. Thaxton. The classroom phone buzzed, and the sound seemed to vibrate deep down into his bones. As he watched Mr. Davison speak into the phone, he tried to read the expression on his teacher's face. His leg trembled beneath his desk. Mr. Davison hung up, and Marshall quickly cast his eyes downward, pretending to concentrate on his open book. Marshall, Mrs. Thaxton would like to see you in her office. He'd been expecting that, but the words still came as a jolt. His chair squeaked as he pushed back from his desk. He stood up and then walked out of the room, desperately trying to appear calm. He started up the stairs. Nothing made sense anymore. Chad beat him up, yet he was the one who was getting in trouble. Everyone was so worried about poor Chad. Where's Chad? Did you see him? Did you talk to him? What did he say? Chad's missing? Good. He's gone, and I'm glad he's gone. Did that make him a bad person? He reached the top of the stairs. The office was to the right, but Marshall's eyes were drawn the other way, down a short hallway to a door with a window. Daylight shone through the window. He stared at the door for a long moment. Maybe it was time people started worrying about poor Marshall, he thought. He stared a moment longer, but then turned and headed toward the office. Tamaya was right. It was time to tell the truth. Mrs. Latherley had her back to him and was bent over as she placed a folder in a filing cabinet. Mrs. Thaxton asked to see me, he said. The school secretary straightened up. Oh, hi, Marshall. We're glad you're here. He wondered what she meant by that. She sent him on back to Mrs. Thaxton's office. The headmistress's door was open. He could see her sitting at her desk, staring out the window. He stepped inside and cleared his throat. You wanted to see me? She turned. Do you know where Tamaya is? It wasn't the question he had expected, and for a moment he wondered if it was some kind of trick. Mrs. Thaxton's face quivered. Do you? She demanded. Ms. Filbert's class? She's not there. She never returned after lunch. I know you two spend a lot of time together. Not a lot. We walk to school together. You know, because we live on the same street. Her mom won't let her walk to school alone. The words were coming out of his mouth as his mind was busily trying to come to grips with what was happening. Monica's her best friend, he said. Maybe she knows. I spoke to Monica. She said Tamaya suddenly left the lunchroom for no reason and never came back. Where were you at lunch? Outside, playing basketball. Did you see her? Let me think. I think I might have seen her by the court. Did she say anything to you? Now I remember. The ball bounced away and she got it, and I went and got it from her. She didn't say anything about leaving school early. Well, this morning she told me her mom was picking her up after school to take her to see a doctor. She's got this really bad rash. Maybe your mom picked her up early? Mrs. Latherley left a message for her mother. We're waiting to hear back. Tamaya's pretty good about following rules, Marshall pointed out. She wouldn't just leave without telling someone. I know, said Mrs. Thaxton. That's exactly what worries me. Marshall waited, but for a long time Mrs. Thaxton didn't say anything. She was looking at him, but it felt more like she was looking through him, as if she had forgotten he was still there. "You can go now," she said at last. He didn't have to be told twice. A short while later, Mrs. Thaxton announced over the PA system that the school was being put on lockdown. Students and teachers were to remain in their classes with the lights off and the doors locked. No one would be allowed to enter or leave the building. But by then, Marshall had already slipped out the side door. Like an escaping prisoner, he had dashed across the grass, frantically climbed over the fence, and then disappeared into the woods.